Every morning, a little girl crossed the park, holding her grandfather's hand on the way to school. One day, she approached a pale, lonely man sitting with an oxygen tank and decided to talk to him. That innocent gesture sparked an unexpected connection that reignited the hope of a man on the brink of death. What began with a simple child's drawing became a legacy that spanned generations. Every morning, Sophia Hayes, a 6-year-old girl with curious eyes and curly hair tied in 2 pigtails, walked hand in hand with her grandfather Anthony through Hyde Park in London. The route was part of their daily routine on the way to the local public school near the park. Anthony, a 67-year-old man with deep wrinkles that told stories of hard work, quickened his pace on that May morning. The London sky threatened rain, and he didn't want his granddaughter to be late. "Grandpa, look at that man over there." Sophia pointed to a bench by the lake, where a thin, pale man sat alone. Beside him was a metallic cylinder that Sophia couldn't identify. He looked sad. "Come on, Sophia, we can't be late," Anthony replied, gently pulling his granddaughter's hand. But Sophia, with that peculiar stubbornness of children, pulled away from her grandfather and ran towards the man before Anthony could stop her. The old man's heart tightened with worry as he watched her approach the stranger. "Hi, sir. Are you okay?" Sophia asked, stopping at a safe distance but close enough for her voice to reach the man. He slowly raised his face, revealing deep, tired eyes. For a moment he seemed confused by the little girl's presence. "Hi," he replied in a hoarse voice, as if unaccustomed to speaking. "My name is Sophia. What's that?" She pointed to the metallic cylinder. It's an oxygen tank. It helps me breathe," he explained, observing the curiosity in the girl's eyes. "Like a superhero with special equipment?" Sophia asked, her eyes sparkling. A reluctant smile appeared on the man's face, as if the muscle had forgotten how to move. "Something like that." Anthony finally reached his granddaughter. "Sophia, let's go." "I apologize, sir. She's very curious." "It's no problem," the man replied, and there was something in his voice, an unexpected softness that made Anthony hesitate. "She reminds me of someone." "I'll draw a picture for you tomorrow," Sophia announced, as her grandfather finally managed to lead her away to continue their walk. The following afternoon, Sophia insisted they pass by the same bench. Anthony, concerned, tried to argue that perhaps the man wouldn't be there anymore, or that they shouldn't bother him, but his granddaughter's determination was unwavering. To his surprise, the man was in the same spot, as if he hadn't left since the day before. His name, they discovered, was Edward Munro. He was 58 years old and had eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Sophia handed him a colorful crayon drawing, a smiling sun, and 2 stick figures sitting on a bench. "It's you and me," she explained proudly, on the park bench. Edward held the paper with trembling hands, and Anthony could have sworn he saw tears in the man's eyes. "Thank you, Sophia. It's been a long time since anyone gave me a gift." In the days that followed, it became part of their routine. Sophia insisted on leaving home earlier to have time to talk with Uncle Ed, as she began to call him. Anthony, initially reluctant, started to notice a change in Edward. His face gained color, his posture gradually improved, and he eagerly awaited the little girl's visit. For a man who seemed to have given up on life, those brief encounters were doing something no medicine could. What Anthony didn't know was that Edward Munro was one of London's wealthiest businessmen. Owner of Munro Developments, responsible for half of the skyscrapers on Oxford Street, he had built a real estate empire valued in billions. But no amount of wealth had prevented the terminal diagnosis he had received 3 weeks earlier, a rare and aggressive lung disease, with a prognosis of only a few days to live. Edward had gone to Hyde Park to say goodbye. It was the place where his mother used to take him as a child, before ambition consumed him and transformed him into a man for whom only numbers and contracts mattered. He planned to sit there, contemplate the lake, and await the inevitable, far from his private medical team and subordinates, who surrounded him not out of affection, but out of interest. But then Sophia appeared, with her genuine innocence and curiosity. Without knowing who he was, without expecting anything in return, she offered him something his money couldn't buy: sincere compassion. A week after their first meeting, Edward asked his lawyer and only confidant, Richard Taylor, to discreetly investigate the lives of Sophia and her grandfather. "Are you sure about this, Edward?" Richard asked, adjusting his glasses on his angular face. Isn't it better to maintain emotional distance at this time? Do as I ask, Richard, Edward replied, with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I want to know everything about them. The report arrived 2 days later. Anthony Hayes had been a widower for 4 years, since his daughter Beatrice had died in a car accident. Since then, he had raised his granddaughter alone, working as a caretaker during the day, a security guard at night, and on weekends as a delivery driver for an app. 3 low-paying jobs barely covered the hospital debts left by his daughter and the rent for a small apartment on the outskirts of the East End. Sophia, despite the difficulties, was an exemplary child. Her teachers described her as intelligent, creative, and extraordinarily empathetic. A diamond waiting to be polished, one of them wrote in a school evaluation. Edward read the report several times, highlighting every detail about the girl's life. Something in that story affected him deeply, more than would be natural for someone who had known the child for only a few days. That night, in his penthouse in Kensington Gardens, Edward called Richard for a decisive conversation. The lawyer found him sitting in front of the window that offered a panoramic view of London, a city he had helped build and had never stopped to admire. I want to create a trust fund for Sophia, he announced without preamble, £5 million, to guarantee her education, housing, and a secure future. Richard nearly choked on the whiskey he was drinking. Edward, are you thinking clearly? This is a decision, and I want to settle all of Anthony's debts, Edward continued, as if he hadn't heard the interruption. Buy a suitable apartment for them, in his name, and establish a lifetime pension that allows him to stop working and dedicate himself to raising his granddaughter. Edward, this is extraordinary, but you barely know these people. Edward turned to face his friend of decades, and there was a determination in his eyes that Richard hadn't seen in a long time. I want to do something meaningful before I go, Richard. Something that isn't just another building with my name on it, another acquisition, another number in my bank account. What about the company board? Your cousins? They'll legally challenge this as soon as you... I don't care. Edward cut him off. Prepare the documents, and one more thing. I want you to deliver my personal card to Mr. Hayes tomorrow. Invite them to visit me on Sunday. Tell them it's important. Richard hesitated. Are you going to tell them? About your condition? Edward turned back to look out the window, at the lights of the city that never slept. I'm going to tell them something much more important, Richard. Something I only discovered yesterday when I finally saw her picture. Whose picture? Of Beatrice Hayes, Sophia's mother. On Saturday morning, when Richard Taylor approached Anthony and Sophia on the park bench, the grandfather immediately tensed up. Men in well-tailored suits rarely brought good news to simple people like him. Mr. Hayes, I'm Richard Taylor, Mr. Edward Munro's lawyer. He introduced himself formally, extending a business card that looked more like a jewel, with embossed gold letters on black paper. Did something happen to Uncle Ed? Sophia asked, clutching her grandfather's hand. Richard smiled at the girl. No, dear, he's fine and would very much like to welcome you to his home tomorrow. It's an important matter. Anthony looked suspiciously at the card. The address indicated one of the most exclusive residential complexes in the capital. I don't understand. Why does he want to see us? We barely know each other. Mr. Munro will explain personally, Richard replied. May I send a car to pick you up tomorrow at 2 p.m? After the lawyer left, Anthony sat on the bench, confused. Sophia, however, was radiant. We're going to visit Uncle Ed's house. Do you think he has a swimming pool, Grandpa? Anthony smiled at his granddaughter's innocence, but couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. On Sunday, promptly at 2 p.m., a black Mercedes parked in front of their small building. The driver, in an immaculate uniform, led them to the luxury vehicle, causing astonishment among the neighbors who watched from their windows. During the journey, Sophia kept her face pressed against the glass, marveling at the transformation of the landscape. They left the outskirts, crossed wide avenues, and finally arrived at a neighborhood where trees were more abundant than lampposts, and residences were hidden behind high walls and sophisticated security systems. I never thought I'd enter a place like this, Anthony murmured, uncomfortable in his newest shirt, already faded from so many washes. The residential complex was a modern fortress. After passing through 2 security checkpoints and a biometric identification system, the car finally parked in front of a mirrored tower. Edward's penthouse was on the top floor. The private elevator opened directly into the living room, a spacious area with a double-height ceiling and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of London. The city looked like an ocean of concrete and glass under the clear Sunday sky. "Uncle Ed." Sophia ran towards Edward, who was waiting for them sitting in an armchair. He was dressed simply, linen trousers and a white shirt, but there was something in his posture that betrayed authority. "Welcome to my home, Sophia," he smiled, carefully hugging the girl so as not to dislodge his oxygen tube. "And thank you for coming, Mr. Hayes." Anthony shook the outstretched hand, noticing how Edward seemed more debilitated than the day before. His skin had a yellowish tone and dark circles framed his eyes. "Please sit down. Richard, bring the album." The lawyer, who had remained discreetly in a corner of the room, approached with a leather-bound photo album. "Mr. Hayes, how long ago did your daughter Beatrice pass away?" Edward asked softly. Anthony stiffened. 4 years. "But how do you know about her?" "Sophia, dear, would you go with Mrs. Irene to see the rest of the house? She has a surprise for you in the kitchen," Edward said, referring to the housekeeper who appeared silently. The girl, enthusiastic about the prospect of exploring that modern mansion, followed the grey-haired lady. When they were alone, Edward opened the album. "Mr. Hayes, what I'm about to tell you will seem incredible, but I ask you to listen to me until the end." The first pages showed a younger Edward, probably in his 30s, next to a woman of serene beauty, curly hair, a luminous smile, and Sophia's same eyes. "Beatrice," Anthony whispered, touching the photograph with trembling fingers. "But how?" "I met your daughter 11 years ago when she worked as a junior architect on one of my projects on Oxford Street. We were very different. I, a businessman obsessed with work. She, an idealistic young woman who wanted to create spaces that improved people's lives." Edward turned another page, revealing photos of the couple in various places. An elegant restaurant, a beach in front of the Eiffel Tower. "We fell in love. It was a brief but intense relationship. We kept it a secret because of the age difference and the professional relationship. I was going through a complicated divorce. Beatrice was reserved about her personal life. My daughter never mentioned—" Anthony shook his head, confused. "We broke up after 6 months. I was involved in a legal dispute for my company, with no time or emotional disposition for a relationship. Beatrice deserved more than I could offer at that moment." Edward took a deep breath, the oxygen whistling in the tube. 2 months later, I tried to find her, but discovered she had resigned. No one knew her whereabouts. I had so many problems that I just let it go. The biggest mistake of my life." Anthony was beginning to understand, and his heart raced. "Are you saying that—" "I never knew about the pregnancy. Beatrice never sought me out, perhaps out of pride, perhaps because she knew I wasn't ready. She was an extraordinary woman capable of raising a daughter alone." Edward turned another page of the album. The last photo showed Beatrice holding a newborn baby in the hospital. "How did you get this photo?" "After Sophia approached me in the park, something about her seemed familiar. Her gestures, her gaze, the way she smiled. I asked Richard to investigate, and he found this photo in an old social media post of Beatrice's. The date coincides with our separation. Sophia has my eyes, Mr. Hayes, and her mother's smile." Anthony stood up, walking across the spacious room. His mind tried to process the revelation. "This is hard to believe." "I have more proof," Edward said, gesturing to Richard, who handed him an envelope. "I had a DNA test done with a strand of hair Sophia left on the drawing. The result is conclusive." Anthony examined the document, the technical words blurred by the tears that began to form. "Why are you telling me this now? Why after all these years?" Edward stood up with difficulty. "Because I'm dying, Mr. Hayes. The disease is in its terminal stage. The doctors gave me at most another week." The silence that followed was interrupted only by the distant sound of Sophia's laughter, coming from somewhere in the penthouse. "I don't want to disrupt the life you've built," Edward continued. "I'm not asking to be recognized as her father now. It would be selfish of me to enter Sophia's life only to leave. What I want is to ensure she has everything she deserves." Richard approached with a folder of documents. "Mr. Monroe has established a trust fund for Sophia. £5 million, which can only be accessed when she turns 18, except for education and health expenses. He has also settled all your medical debts, Mr. Hayes, and bought an apartment in Notting Hill in your name. There's a monthly pension that will allow you to dedicate yourself exclusively to raising Sophia. Anthony sat down again, stunned. It's too much. It's the least I can do. I lost the chance to see my daughter grow up, Mr. Hayes. I can't recover that time, but I can ensure her future is as bright as she deserves. At that moment, Sophia returned to the room, carrying a plate of chocolate truffles. Look, Grandpa, Mrs. Irene taught me how to make real chocolate truffles, not just the homemade fudge we make. Edward and Anthony exchanged a look. There was a silent understanding between them, an unstated promise that whatever the arrangement, Sophia's well-being would come first. Uncle Ed, are you crying? Sophia asked, noticing the moisture in the man's eyes. Sometimes adults cry with happiness, Sophia, he replied, caressing the girl's face. And today I'm very happy to have you both here. On Monday morning, Sophia insisted on visiting Edward before school. Anthony, still processing the revelations of the previous day, couldn't deny the request. The night had been long, everything he had discovered swirling in his mind. Beatrice had never mentioned Edward, but now certain things made sense. The period when she had been happiest, followed by a sudden withdrawal, the move to another city during her pregnancy, the return to London only when Sophia was 2 years old. When they arrived at the penthouse, they found a different scene. The spacious living room had been transformed into an improvised hospital room. Edward was in a hospital bed, surrounded by medical equipment and a nurse monitoring his vital signs. Is Uncle Ed sick, Grandpa? Sophia asked, squeezing her grandfather's hand. Uncle Ed is tired, dear, Anthony replied, trying to shield her from the harsh reality. Edward opened his eyes upon hearing the girl's voice, his face lit up with a weak smile. Sophia, it's good you came. I have something for you. The nurse helped him sit up, adjusting pillows behind his back. Edward gestured for them to approach. Sophia showed no fear of the tubes and machines. She approached naturally, as if visiting a friend who just needed rest. I brought a new drawing, she said, handing him a colorful sheet. It's the three of us, me, you, and Grandpa eating ice cream in the park. Edward held the drawing with trembling hands. It's beautiful, Sophia. I'll cherish it. Richard entered the room carrying a carved wooden box. The documents are all ready, Edward, as requested. Edward gestured for the lawyer to approach with the box. Sophia, I want to give you a special gift. This box belonged to my mother, your great-grandmother. He hesitated, almost revealing the real kinship. Inside, I've put several things I'd like you to have. The box was beautiful, with carvings of birds and flowers on the dark wood. When Sophia opened it, she found a collection of small treasures. A leather-bound diary with a golden clasp, a silver bracelet with a star-shaped charm, some old photographs, and several sealed envelopes with future dates written on the front. These envelopes are letters I wrote for you, Sophia. Each one should only be opened on the indicated date. The first is for your next birthday. The others, for special moments in your life. When you turn 15, when you graduate from high school, when you enter university. Edward paused, breathing with difficulty. They are advice and stories I'd like to share with you. Sophia looked at the contents of the box with wonder. Thank you, Uncle Ed. I'll take good care of everything. Edward reached out to touch the girl's face. Sophia, you gave me a much greater gift than you imagine. You brought joy back to me in my last days. The girl leaned in and kissed Edward's forehead, a gesture so natural and affectionate that it brought tears to the eyes of all the adults present. Sophia, can you promise me 3 things? Edward asked, gently holding her small hand in his. I promise anything you want, Uncle Ed. First, always be kind, as you were to me in the park. Second, never stop seeing the invisible people, those whom no one else notices. Third, use the gift you will receive to make the world a better place. Sophia nodded solemnly, with the seriousness that only children can show in important moments. I promise, Uncle Ed. Cross my heart, she said, making a cross over her chest, as she had learned in English classes. Edward smiled. Now, would you go with Mrs. Irene to the kitchen? She made those chocolate truffles you liked, and I need to talk a bit with your grandfather. When Sophia left, accompanied by the housekeeper, Edward turned to Anthony. I know I'm asking a lot, but I need you to promise me a few things too, Mr. Hayes. Anthony sat in the chair beside the bed. You've already done more than I could ask for. Don't tell Sophia that I'm her biological father until she's older, capable of fully understanding. I don't want her to associate the discovery of her father with the moment of my departure. There's a letter explaining everything, which Richard will deliver when the time is right. When would that time be? You'll know, when she asks questions about her father when she's ready. I trust your judgment. Edward gestured to Richard, who approached with another envelope. Here is the apartment deed, the trust fund documents, and a credit card linked to an account for immediate expenses. The main fund will only be available when Sophia comes of age, but there are resources to ensure the best education, health, and comfort for both of you. Anthony accepted the documents reluctantly. It still seems unreal. A week ago, I was worried about how to pay the overdue rent. Mr. Hayes, I know you are a man of integrity. You raised Sophia with love and dedication, even facing difficulties. That's worth more than any fortune. Don't see this as charity, but as her right, as my daughter. Edward paused, breathing with difficulty. The nurse approached to adjust his oxygen. There's one more thing. My cousin, Augustus Munro, is an ambitious man. He expects to inherit control of the company when I'm gone. When he learns about Sophia and the trust fund, he will likely try to challenge it legally. Richard is prepared for this, but I want you to be aware. Could he take what you left for Sophia? Not legally, but he might try. The DNA test and the documents we've prepared should be sufficient, but Augustus has influence and resources. If anything happens, there's a special letter in Sophia's box. It's marked with a golden star. It should only be opened in an emergency. Anthony nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility. You can trust me, Mr. Munro. I will protect Sophia and your legacy. Thank you. And please call me Edward. After all, we are family now. When Sophia returned to the room, she found the two men in silence, a comfortable silence of those who had reached a deep understanding. Edward seemed exhausted, but there was a peace in his demeanor that hadn't been there before. Sophia, I think Uncle Ed needs to rest now, Anthony said gently. But we'll come back tomorrow, right? She asked, looking hopefully at her grandfather. Edward and Anthony exchanged a quick glance. Both knew there might not be a tomorrow. Of course, dear, Edward replied, sparing Anthony the lie. And in the meantime, I'll dream of your next drawing. Sophia approached the bed and carefully hugged Edward. See you tomorrow, Uncle Ed. Dream beautiful things. When they left the penthouse, the London sky began to darken, tinged with an intense orange between the buildings. In the elevator, Sophia held the carved wooden box tightly against her chest, as if carrying the most precious treasure in the world. Anthony, in turn, carried the weight of the secret and the promise made to a man who, in a few days, had transformed their lives forever. The next morning, as Anthony prepared to take Sophia to school, he received a call from Richard. Edward had passed away during the night, peacefully in his sleep. His last request was for Anthony and Sophia to attend the funeral, which would be held the following day at Highgate Cemetery. Anthony hung up the phone, facing the difficult task of explaining to a 6-year-old child that her new friend would no longer be on the park bench. When he entered the small kitchen, he found Sophia in front of the open wooden box, contemplating the old photographs. "Grandpa, look at this lady in the photo with Uncle Ed. She looks like me, doesn't she?" Anthony sat beside his granddaughter, looking at the photograph she held. It was Beatrice smiling next to Edward in front of a construction site. "Yes, dear, she looks very much like you." Edward Munro's funeral was an event that blended the solemnity of great fortunes with the coldness of superficial relationships. Highgate Cemetery, with its imposing sculptures and sumptuous tombs, received dozens of businessmen, politicians, and influential figures of London society. Few, however, seemed genuinely saddened by the real estate magnate's passing. Amidst the dark suits and rehearsed expressions of sorrow, Sophia and Anthony stood out. The girl, dressed in her best navy blue dress, held her grandfather's hand tightly as she watched the ceremony with curious eyes. Anthony, uncomfortable in his only suit, kept his distance from the center of attention. Richard, fulfilling his role as lawyer and loyal friend, conducted the ceremony with dignity. When it was time for the speeches, he surprised everyone by inviting Sophia to say a few words. Mr. Munro left specific instructions for Sophia Hayes to have the opportunity to speak, he announced, ignoring the murmurs of surprise among those present. Anthony hesitated, but Sophia let go of his hand and walked determinedly to the small podium. She had to stand on tiptoes to reach the microphone, which Richard adjusted for her. "Uncle Ed was my friend," she began, with the disconcerting simplicity of children. "I met him in the park. He was alone and looked sad, so I decided to talk to him. Then I brought him drawings every day, and he always smiled when he saw me." An absolute silence fell over the assembly. The powerful businessmen and politicians, accustomed to elaborate speeches and rigid protocols, seemed hypnotized by the sincerity of that little speaker. "Uncle Ed told me that kindness is like a little seed we plant in people's hearts. Even when we don't see the plant grow, it's there, making the world better. I promised him that I would always be kind, especially to the invisible people, those no one sees." Silent tears streamed down the faces of several attendees, touched by the innocent wisdom that emanated from those simple words. "I will miss Uncle Ed, but I know he's in the stars now, like my mommy. And when I look at the sky at night, I feel like they're watching over me." When Sophia finished, there was no applause. It would have been inappropriate for the occasion, but a collective whisper swept through the venue, like a gentle breeze confirming the impact of those sincere words. Among those present, one man in particular observed the scene with disturbing intensity. Augustus Monroe, Edward's cousin and vice president of Monroe Developments, kept his eyes fixed on Sophia, his face contorted in an expression difficult to decipher. Beside him, an elegant woman whispered in his ear, casting calculating glances in the girl's direction. After the ceremony, as the guests dispersed, Augustus approached Richard. "Who is this child, and why was she invited to speak at my cousin's funeral?" he demanded, without bothering to lower his voice. "Sophia Hayes and her grandfather were personal friends of Edward's," Richard replied with studied calm. "He left specific instructions regarding her participation." "Friends? Edward didn't have friends, he had interests," Augustus retorted. "I want a meeting tomorrow at the office. As vice president, I will assume control of the company and need to be aware of all the details of the will." Before Richard could reply, Augustus cast a final glance at Sophia and walked away with firm steps, followed by a retinue of assistants. 2 weeks passed. Anthony and Sophia moved to the apartment in Notting Hill, an upscale residential complex with a swimming pool, playground, and 24-hour security. For Sophia, it was like living in a palace after the small apartment on the outskirts. For Anthony, it was a constant reminder of the extraordinary turn their lives had taken. The adaptation was not easy. Neighbors looked with curiosity at the simple-looking old man and his lively granddaughter. In the playground, some mothers discreetly pulled their children away when Sophia approached, as if poverty were a contagious disease that newly acquired money had not yet cured. Sophia, however, remained Sophia, joyful, curious, and incredibly resilient. She quickly befriended the complex staff, knew every security guard, doorman, and gardener by name, and gradually won over even the most reserved children with her natural generosity. Life was beginning to find a new rhythm when, on a Thursday afternoon, the doorbell rang. Anthony opened the door and found Richard, accompanied by a bailiff. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Hayes, but we have a situation," Richard said with a serious expression. The bailiff handed over a sealed envelope. "You are being summoned to appear at a hearing at the Old Bailey Courthouse next Tuesday." After the bailiff left, Richard entered the apartment. "Augustus is contesting Edward's will," he explained. "He alleges that Edward was not in full possession of his mental faculties when he established the trust fund for Sophia." Anthony sat heavily on the sofa. "Can he do that?" "Legally, yes. As the closest relative and business partner, he has the right to contest. But don't worry, we are prepared." "What if he finds out that Sophia is Edward's daughter? For now, he only knows about the trust fund." Edward was discreet in establishing the provisions, justifying them as an act of philanthropy. "But if Augustus investigates further, could we lose everything?" Anthony asked, looking worriedly at Sophia, who was drawing peacefully in the next room. "Not with the evidence we have. The DNA test is conclusive, and Edward left a sworn statement recognizing Sophia as his daughter. But Augustus is powerful and has connections. He can drag the process for years, temporarily freezing the assets." Anthony stood up, walking to the window. Down below, the city continued its frantic pace, oblivious to the personal dramas unfolding in its skyscrapers. "I cannot allow Sophia to go through a legal process. She has already lost her mother. She just lost Edward. It would be traumatic." Richard placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "I promised Edward that I would protect you, and I will keep that promise. But we need to be prepared for the worst-case scenario." That night, after Sophia fell asleep, Anthony took the carved wooden box from the cabinet. He remembered Edward's words about the letter marked with a golden star, which should only be opened in an emergency. He hesitated, turning the sealed envelope between his fingers. Was this the moment? He decided to wait. First, they would face the process through conventional means. The letter would be his last resort. On the morning of the hearing, Richard picked them up early. Sophia would stay with Mrs. Irene, Edward's former housekeeper, who now worked for them a few times a week. The Old Bailey courthouse was intimidating with its imposing architecture and labyrinthine corridors. In the courtroom, Augustus was already waiting, accompanied by two lawyers with confident expressions. When Anthony entered, Augustus gave him a thinly veiled look of contempt. The judge, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, opened the session. Augustus's lawyers presented their argument. Edward was under the influence of strong medications, with his mental faculties compromised by his terminal illness. The decision to leave a fortune to a child he had known for less than a week was clearly irrational and should be annulled. Richard skillfully counter-argued, presenting statements from doctors attesting to Edward's lucidity until his last days. He also showed the businessman's philanthropic history, proving that the donation, although generous, was not inconsistent with his pattern of behavior. The hearing lasted for hours. When it finally ended, the judge ordered the temporary freezing of the trust fund until a final decision was made. Anthony could continue in the apartment with Sophia, and the monthly pension would be maintained, but the main funds would remain inaccessible. "We bought time," Richard said as they left the courthouse, "but Augustus won't give up easily." Back at the apartment, Anthony found Sophia asleep on the sofa, clutching the wooden box. Careful not to wake her, he gently took the box from her arms and carried it to the bedroom. When he returned to the living room, he noticed an envelope fallen on the floor, the envelope marked with the golden star. The seal was broken. "Sophia woke up earlier and found the letter," Mrs. Irene explained. "I couldn't stop her from opening it. She said it was special." With a racing heart, Anthony opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter in Edward's elegant script and a USB drive. "Dear Mr. Hayes," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means my fears have been confirmed. Augustus is contesting my provisions for Sophia. On the attached USB drive, there is a recording of a video conference between me and Augustus, held 3 days before my passing. In it, I confess to him that Sophia is my biological daughter and explain my reasons for establishing the trust fund. More importantly, the recording clearly demonstrates my mental lucidity and the premeditation of my decisions." Augustus reacted with fury, threatening to contest everything legally. "This is why I prepared this contingency." Anthony could hardly believe it. Edward had anticipated Augustus's every move, preparing even in his last days. "Please, deliver this USB drive to Richard immediately. He will know how to use it to protect Sophia. And remember our conversation. When the time is right, Sophia must know the truth about her origin. She deserves to know her complete story." The letter ended with a sentence that brought tears to Anthony's eyes. "Thank you for being the father I couldn't be for her, Edward." At that moment, Sophia entered the room, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Grandpa, I saw the letter. Was Uncle Ed my real daddy?" Anthony sat on the sofa and opened his arms for Sophia, who ran into his embrace. For a few minutes, they stayed like that, in silence, while he gathered the courage to confirm what his granddaughter had already discovered. "Yes, dear," he said finally, caressing her curly hair so much like Beatrice's. "Uncle Ed was your biological father. He and your mother met a long time ago before you were born." "Why did he never tell me?" Sophia asked, her eyes welling up, but without crying. There was a surprising maturity in her gaze. "I think he didn't want to confuse you, coming into your life only to leave soon after. He wanted to protect you in his own way." Sophia became thoughtful. "So I have two fathers, the daddy who is in heaven with Mommy and you, Grandpa, who takes care of me every day." Anthony felt a lump in his throat. "That's right, Sophia. And both love you very much. Can I keep his photo on my bedside table, along with Mommy's?" "Of course you can. Sophia got up and went to get her favorite photo of Edward, the one where he smiled next to Beatrice in front of a building under construction. When she returned, she asked seriously, "Grandpa, does that angry man at the funeral want to take away the gift my daddy left me?" Anthony hesitated, surprised by his granddaughter's sharp perception. "Don't worry about it, dear. Richard is taking care of everything." "Okay," she replied simply, trusting her grandfather's word. "Can I call him? I want to show him the letter I found." Minutes later, Richard arrived at the apartment, breathless and worried. Anthony explained the situation, while Sophia proudly showed him the letter and the USB drive. "This changes everything," Richard said, examining the contents of the USB drive on his laptop. Edward recorded the entire conversation. Augustus admits knowing about the paternity and threatens to contest any provision in favor of Sophia. It's practically a confession of bad faith. "What do we do now?" Anthony asked. "We request an emergency hearing. With this evidence, we can not only secure the trust fund, but also seek sanctions against Augustus for bad faith litigation." The next morning, at Richard's office, a team of lawyers worked feverishly preparing the new strategy. Sophia, sitting in an armchair too large for her size, observed everything with attentive eyes, clutching the wooden box she never let far from her. "The judge granted a hearing for tomorrow," Richard announced, hanging up the phone. "Augustus has already been notified." "Do I need to testify?" Anthony asked, worried. "It won't be necessary. The recording speaks for itself." Sophia stood up, walking to Richard. "Can I come too? I want to see the man who's trying to take my daddy's gift." The adults exchanged worried glances. "Sophia, these hearings are serious places, with many difficult words," Richard explained. "I promised Uncle Ed I would be brave," the girl insisted. "And he said I should see the invisible people. I think I need to see this man who doesn't like me, even without knowing me." Again, Sophia's simple wisdom silenced the adults. "We'll consult the judge," Richard conceded. "If he allows it, you can attend." On the morning of the decisive hearing, the Old Bailey courthouse seemed even more imposing. Sophia, dressed in a navy blue dress and a white ribbon in her hair, held her grandfather's hand tightly as they ascended the marble steps. Augustus was already in the courtroom, now accompanied by 3 lawyers. When he saw Sophia enter, his face hardened. The girl in turn looked him directly in the eyes, without fear or anger, only with genuine curiosity. The judge, surprised by the child's presence, asked, "Is this Sophia Hayes? Why is she present?" "Your Honor, Sophia asked to attend. Considering that the case directly involves her future, I believe it is appropriate if the court permits," Richard replied. The judge reflected for a moment. "Very well, provided she remains silent." The hearing began with Richard presenting the new evidence, the recording where Augustus admitted knowing about Sophia's paternity and planned to contest the will. As the recording played, Augustus's face went from confidence to concern and finally to defeat. "Was this recording obtained legally?" one of Augustus's lawyers questioned. "Yes," Richard confirmed. "It was made during a corporate video conference on company equipment, with the knowledge of both parties. Furthermore, we have the DNA test confirming paternity, a sworn statement from Edward Monroe, and testimonies from doctors attesting to his full mental capacity." When it seemed that the situation could not get worse for Augustus, Sophia stood up and walked to the judge's table, ignoring Anthony's alarmed whispers. "Excuse me, Mr. Judge," she said in a clear voice. "Can I say something?" The judge, surprised by the direct approach, looked at the lawyers who seemed equally perplexed. "Sophia, we cannot interrupt the hearing," Richard tried to explain. But the judge, a father of 3 daughters, saw something in Sophia's determined gaze that made him comply. "I will allow the minor to speak. It is unusual, but given the circumstances—" Sophia climbed onto a small step near the judge's table. "Mr. Judge, I just wanted to show you something. May I?" When the judge nodded, she took a folded paper from her dress pocket. It was the last drawing she had made for Edward, 3 figures holding hands under a starry sky. "This is my daddy. This is me. And this is my grandpa," she explained, pointing to each figure. "My daddy gave me a gift before he went to heaven. He said it was for me to use to make the world better. I promised. That man there," she pointed to Augustus, "wants to take my gift. But the gift isn't just money, it's the promise I made. The silence in the room was absolute. Sophia continued with the devastating sincerity of children. If he needs the money so much, he can have some. Grandpa says we should share, but I need to keep my promise to my daddy. Augustus abruptly stood up and left the room, followed by his disconcerted lawyers. The judge, visibly moved, thanked Sophia and asked her to return to her seat. Minutes later, one of Augustus's lawyers returned, informing that his client was withdrawing the contestation and requesting a settlement. My client proposes to fully recognize the will in exchange for withdrawing the accusation of bad faith, the lawyer explained, avoiding looking directly at Sophia. Richard consulted Anthony with his eyes, who nodded. We accept, provided there is a formal guarantee that there will be no further contestations in the future. The agreement was sealed that same day. Sophia's trust fund was unlocked, and Augustus signed a document committing never to question Edward's provisions again. When they left the courthouse, reporters awaited at the entrance. The story of the young heiress who had faced a powerful businessman had leaked, and news channels wanted details. Mr. Hayes, is it true that Edward Munro left £5 million to your granddaughter? A reporter asked, extending a microphone. Mr. Hayes, is Sophia truly Edward Munro's biological daughter? Another questioned. Richard placed himself between the reporters and the family. My clients will not make statements. This is a private family matter. Protected by security guards, they managed to get into the car and drive away from the commotion. In the back seat, Sophia seemed thoughtful. Are you okay, dear? Anthony asked, concerned about the impact of that exposure. Yes, Grandpa. I was just thinking about my promise to Daddy. How will I make the world better? 10 years passed. Sophia Hayes Munro, now 16, had transformed into a determined and compassionate young woman. She studied at one of London's most prestigious schools, where she excelled not only academically, but also for her social engagement. Upon turning 15, with Anthony's authorization and Richard's support, she used a portion of the trust fund's income to create the Edward Munro Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to connecting children and adolescents from underprivileged communities with lonely seniors in nursing homes and care facilities. The project, inspired by her own experience with Edward, grew rapidly. In just 1 year, the foundation already maintained programs in 10 British cities, benefiting hundreds of seniors and young people. Sophia dedicated all her weekends to the project, personally visiting the units, talking with participants, always attentive to ensure that the essence of the initiative was preserved, seeing the invisible, as Edward had taught. Anthony, now 77, proudly followed his granddaughter's journey. Retired, he divided his time between painting classes, a hobby he discovered late in life, and volunteering at the foundation. It was common to see him in the units, telling stories to groups of children or teaching chess to the elderly. On a Saturday afternoon, Sophia and Anthony visited a new foundation unit on the outskirts of London. As they walked through the newly inaugurated facilities, an elderly lady timidly approached. "You're Sophia, the founder, aren't you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. I've lived alone for 15 years, since my husband passed away. Before the foundation, weeks would go by without me talking to anyone. Now Juliana visits me every Wednesday. She's 12 and teaches me how to use the computer. In return, I teach her crochet and my old recipes." Sophia hugged the lady, feeling that familiar emotion that always enveloped her when she saw the concrete results of the project. It was as if a part of Edward was present, silently approving. Later, on the way back home, Sophia and Anthony passed through Hyde Park. It was a ritual they maintained religiously. Once a month, they visited the bench where Sophia had met Edward. "Grandpa, do you think he would be proud?" Sophia asked as they sat on the bench by the lake. "I'm absolutely sure," Anthony replied, hugging his granddaughter by the shoulders. "You transformed a tragedy into something beautiful, Sophia. There's no greater gift you could have given him." Sophia watched a group of children playing near the lake. Among them, a girl of approximately 6 years old stood out for the contagious energy with which she chased a colorful ball. "Look, Grandpa," Sophia pointed discreetly. "That little girl reminds me of myself at that age." On the other side of the park, a solitary figure caught Sophia's attention. It was an elderly man, sitting alone on a bench, watching the birds with a distant expression. "I'll be right back," Sophia said, standing up. Anthony watched with a smile as his granddaughter approached the stranger, introduced herself, and started a conversation. A few minutes later, she returned. His name is Charles. He's a retired professor and comes to the park every day. He's lived alone since his wife passed away 2 years ago. I invited him to visit the foundation next week. Anthony nodded, moved. You truly learned to see the invisible. I learned from the best, Sophia replied, taking out an old faded photograph from her pocket, Edward and Beatrice, smiling, looking at the camera with eyes full of hope. That night, before going to sleep, Sophia opened the carved wooden box, now carefully kept on her desk. She reread the last letter she had opened, addressed to her 16th birthday. Dear Sophia, Edward had written, today you turn 16, and I imagine the extraordinary woman you must be becoming. 10 years ago, a 6-year-old girl taught me the greatest lesson of my life, that true wealth lies in the bonds we create, in the kindness we offer without expecting anything in return. You saved me, Sophia, not just from loneliness, but from a lifetime of regrets. Wherever I am now, know that I am watching over you, proud of your path. Keep seeing the invisible, my daughter. Keep planting seeds of kindness. This is the true legacy I leave you, much greater than any fortune. With eternal love, your father. Sophia closed her eyes, hugging the letter to her chest. Outside, London stars shone faintly through the metropolis's light pollution. But for Sophia, each one was a reminder of the promise she had made years ago, a promise that had become her life's purpose, to make the world a better place, one act of kindness at a time. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Sophia and Edward has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the transformative power of kindness. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to reading your comments and knowing how this story of Sophia, Anthony, and Edward touched your lives.